Good afternoon and welcome to From Someone Who Knows. This is a weekly segment that gets you an inside look, a more in-depth look at a story from this week that has a lot of attention paid to it, and you'll be able to hear from someone who knows. In this case, it is a judge who is pronouncing a verdict on Ruth Miller. Ruth Miller was the Amish mother from last August who threw her own 4-year-old son into Atwood Lake in Tuscarawas County in Ohio. The sheriff in that county said she did so because she was experiencing a spiritual delusion. She then proceeded to try and get a golf cart and drive her 3 teenage children into the lake, presumably to give them to God. They survived. And as the investigation played out, it turned out that Ruth Miller and her husband Marcus Miller had gone to Atwood Lake to test themselves, to test their faith to God in a number of ways. Their fellow parishioners had told authorities following this crime that the two had become extremists in their belief, and they were worried about the Millers, and rightfully so. At Atwood Lake, the couple tried to walk on water. When that didn't happen, they claim it proved to them that they weren't faithful, so they continued to carry out different tests to prove their worth to God. One of the tests cost Marcus Miller his life. Very early in the morning on a Saturday last August, he went for a lengthy swim in Atwood Lake and he did not survive. Authorities think he drowned. Nothing to do with Ruth Miller. He drowned on his own. But when he did not survive, according to Ruth Miller, that was yet a further indication that they weren't faithful. And that's when she threw her 4-year-old son in the lake and he drowned. The first piece of video we're going to show you, the first part of this story, is perhaps the very reason that the judge found her not guilty by reason of insanity. It is body cam video from the very moments after she tried to drive her 3 teenage children into the lake. You are going to hear her say that she gave him to God, meaning the 4-year-old. You'll also hear them ask about her husband, and she makes the comment that he is at the bottom of the lake, that a large fish swallowed him, and he is at the bottom of the lake. So for the first part of this, From Someone Who Knows, before we get you to the verdict, before we hear from both the state and the prosecution as to what should happen to Ruth Miller now, let's listen to the body cam video from that day back in August.
I gave him to God.
You gave him to God today.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I threw him in the lake and I gave him to them. And people are going to tell me that I'm crazy, but he is real. And he loves you. He really does love you. He loves you. And I doubted him. I doubted him so many times. But I am to tell you, he is coming soon. He is coming very soon. Prepare your hearts. Well, the end is close. And I'm for sure supposed to tell you that he does love you. Okay?
Ma'am, can you explain to me what happened? Who did you throw in the water?
I gave my son to God.
Your son?
Yeah.
Where's your husband?
He went for a walk this morning.
And you haven't seen him since?
Never come back. And we went to the boat and his clothes were there. And God told me he in the lake and the fish swallowed. And you're actually supposed to go look for him in the bottom of the lake. When you will find the fish and you will find the hook. And then you will believe. But ye of your little faith that do not believe before sleep. Go. So send people down to the bottom of the lake looking for
How old's your son that's in the lake?
4. He's sweet. I do.
Okay. 7/9/40 Central.
That body cam video would proceed to get even a little more bizarre when Ruth Miller got on her knees with a paramedic in the parking lot to say a prayer. Immediately after that, the court ordered a psychological evaluation. The prosecutor ordered a psychological evaluation, and her own defense attorneys ordered one by 3 different doctors. And that's going to play an important role when you listen to the judge's verdict. Most of the times, and we can even think back as recent as the Bianca Ellis case, the woman who was found guilty of stabbing 3-year-old Julian Wood in a grocery store parking lot. Her defense was not guilty by reason of insanity, but in that case, the doctor that was hired by the prosecution felt that she was not insane at the very moment of the crime. Not so much, before, after, in any time period, but at the moment of the crime. That is the designation according to the law. So understanding that she was given, in this case, Ruth Miller, 3 evaluations that all came out the very same, that said she was suffering from severe mental disease, is the reason for the verdict from the judge. In the Bianca Ellis case, there were differing opinions of whether or not she was insane at the time of stabbing of Julian Wood. So next up in this, we're going to hear from the judge in the case, issue his verdict. Again, this is from someone who knows.
I'm concluding that on or about August the 23rd of 2025, that Ruth R. Miller did knowingly cause serious physical harm to Vincent Miller. And concluding that on or about August the 23rd of 2025, that Ruth R. Miller was a parent or a child under the age of 18 years of age, and she created a substantial risk to health or safety, in this case of Amber Miller, by violating a duty of care, protection, or support. Including that on or about August 23rd, 2025, that Ruth R. Miller unlawfully did knowingly cause or attempt to cause physical harm to Amber Miller, family or household member. Also concluding that on or about August the 23rd of 2025, that Ruth R. Miller unlawfully did knowingly cause or attempt to cause physical harm to Joel Miller, family or household member. Also completing that on or about August the 23rd of 2025, that Ruth R. Miller unlawfully did knowingly cause or attempt to cause physical harm to Jordan Miller, family or household member. Now, Ruth, I've also taken into consideration not only the police reports that were provided. I've read through all of the forensic examinations that he conducted in this case, and there were 3 of them. And I think it might have been said earlier, whether it was out here or in chambers, it truly is unanimous. I ordered that a agency conduct an evaluation, Forensic Diagnostic 9. Your attorneys retained an individual to conduct an evaluation, and the city, all of us had essentially our own evaluators conduct an evaluation. And while, curiously, there was maybe differences of opinion among the doctors as to what the mental disease was in this case, they all concluded that you suffered from some form of mental disease that prevented you from knowing the wrongfulness of your conduct. I would also note, and I'm just going to single out Dr. Merritt. I think they all have very, very thorough report, but I think some of these findings are worth noting as well. And that is, it's not just the 3 doctors who came to this conclusion that you did not recognize the wrongfulness of your acts. There are numerous witnesses who have contact with you on the days leading up to this event, that have contact with you on the day of the event, and also shortly thereafter. And to some extent, their observations and opinions here, I think, are relevant as well. Specifically singling out, though, some of the summary that was noted by Dr. Merritt. He says Mrs. Millard's described in the weeks leading up to the alleged offense having shortened and erratic sleep. She described having a euphoric mood at times, which felt like she was getting married all over again. Grandiose, distractible, and at times had racing thoughts. Ms. Miller described descriptions of her beliefs, particularly those about tests in her expected ability to reflect grandiose and delusional thinking. She ordinarily did not believe she would have ever had the ability to walk on water, but she also believed that God had asked her to be swallowed by a fish, and she asked that her husband, at one point in time, to suffocate her. These reflect delusional and distorted thinking, which she did not otherwise have outside of mental health episodes. Based upon these findings that I have made in this case, I am concluding that pursuant to Ohio Revised Code Section 2945-37, that the defendant, Ruth R. Miller, is not guilty by reason of insanity. I think that's the only conclusion I can reach in this case based upon the evidence that's been presented to me.
And that was the finding. Now, many are asking what happens now? What happens to Ruth Miller? She does not just to get to walk free. We've had discussions with our own defense analysts who say the state now has 10 days to get her committed. The better term is that her life will be observed and governed by the court for the rest of her life. But before we get to that hearing, which will be 1 week from tomorrow on Friday, March 13th, we got a chance to hear from the attorneys from both sides in this case. And it was interesting that the prosecution does not see this as a lost case where they did not win this case with a guilty plea or a guilty verdict because of the circumstances and because of those reports by police. And we're going to hear from both the prosecutor and the defense on what they think should happen, what level of commitment they should see out of Ruth Miller as soon as we get back from this break. We will be right back. And welcome back to From Someone Who Knows. We've just heard from the judge in the Ruth Miller case that she was not guilty by reason of insanity, although she did. These facts are stipulated that she did cause the death of her 4-year-old son, Vincent Miller, when she threw him into Atwood Lake and he drowned. And as you heard in the body cam video, she told authorities that she gave him to God, that it was a test of her faith. And that's why she did it. So what happens now? Ruth Miller does not get to walk free, and in fact, she was remanded back to the county jail immediately following that hearing. There will be a placement hearing held on Friday, March 13th, 1 week from tomorrow, to decide just exactly where Ruth Miller goes. It will more than likely be some sort of mental health facility. The prosecution is going to ask for a lockdown facility to where she can receive further treatment for her mental disease. Lockdown meaning she's not allowed to leave, but she could have visits from her family and friends. But that's not what the defense thinks should happen, at least on down the road. Now, if Ruth Miller and when she is placed in a mental health facility, they will then review her her mental state every 2 years. And a judge will be able to determine, does she remain locked up? Does she remain in a lockdown facility? Can she be let out? Can she go home to family? Is there an in-between? But the soonest that could happen would be in 2 years. But now let's listen to the prosecution as he describes this case, and really the fact that there was no doubt that she was insane, at least with severe mental disease at the time of the crime she committed.
I think that they all agreed that she was undergoing some type of psychotic episode at the time, and she had mental health issues leading up to the time when these tragic events occurred. As far as the diagnoses being that different, I think that it's the route you get there. And I know doctors sometimes disagree. But they all concluded that she had a psychotic episode at the time.
At the time.
And leading up to it.
But presently, now.
Presently, she has been medicated, and she has we've seen reports that she's expressed remorse and regret and grief for what she's done.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Is there presently, even if she did not have an understanding at the time as adjudicated here of the wrongfulness of her acts, do you have a sense at all that she understands the wrongfulness of her acts today in court?
It's difficult for the state to say that, because we don't get to talk to the defendant. You'll have to ask Mr. Friedman that. But from the reports I've seen, I know they've reevaluated her after the fact, and there has been indication in the reports that she does.
What about to those who see this and say this is a 4-year-old child that was murdered, and they might see this as not really justice?
These are the laws of the state of Ohio, and we're duty-bound to follow the laws of the state of Ohio, and that's justice. So that's what I would say to that.
Do you think she was brainwashed in any way?
No, I believe she was suffering from a severe mental illness.
What do you say about the level of sadness about this case in general? It got national attention, tragic in many ways, and what you've seen on that video.
It's just tragic. It's just very, very sad. There's nothing I can say. I can't put into words how tragic and sad it is. I couldn't imagine as a parent myself losing a child, let alone being mentally ill and having caused my child's death.
And it was a word we heard very often, unimaginable, is surrounding this case. But now it comes down to the defense. Her defense attorney also stood in front of the cameras to answer questions about what his client, what Ruth Miller currently feels, and what she felt at the time of this severe mental disease. And then how he feels she should be handled moving forward. The placement of her, and in fact, he thinks at some point she should be allowed to go home to her family. Let's listen now to her defense attorney in the Ruth Miller case.
This was much expected, but how did you feel coming out of this hearing with what the judge decided?
Well, I felt a great sense of relief. I stood before you at the time of the arraignment last year and declared that this would be a case of not guilty by reason of insanity. We felt that based upon our initial interactions and investigation into the facts. And I'm happy to see today that all of the experts and Judge Ernest came to that conclusion as well. So it's still a relief. Just because we believe that's what it was going to be doesn't always mean that that's how it's going to turn out. But today it was correctly decided.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of defendants facing similar charges who would argue that maybe they qualify for this outcome. How difficult is it to get here? What are the obstacles or the hurdles that you have to jump to get to where we are today?
Yeah, so it's a high standard, and you don't see not guilties by reason of insanity often. The challenges are making sure that the right professionals are looking at the case, those that really understand the conduct, the mental health implications, and so forth, and then can apply the legal standards that are needed. So you have to have the right people involved, and they have to have the right amount of time to do their job. And then you have to have a good judge, like we did in this case, who really took the time to look over all of the evidence, and you heard how he thoughtfully went through all of the pieces of evidence today. So the system has to be operating kind of at all levels, all components at the highest levels, and then you come to the right results as we saw here.
And for those who are detractors who say this is getting away with murder, what would you say to them?
I would say it absolutely is not getting away with murder. Ruth Miller would not have been involved in this case had it not been for the mental disease that you heard about in the courtroom, period. And that's a hard stop, end of story. She is mortified by the fact that she was involved in that situation on August 23rd, 2025. And had she been receiving the care that was necessary at that time, none of us would be standing here right now.
So,
Does she
so
understand
while
it
she
now?
was,
Is she sorry? Like, does she understand it now? Or was it just at the time? Is she sorry?
I think that she has been receiving care to a degree. She'll continue to receive care, and she'll continue to understand what happened on that day.
right, so while the judge, in his decision today, said that she did not at the time understand the wrongfulness of her actions, do you think she understands better the wrongfulness of her actions today?
Well, I think the mental health component here is really complex, and that's going to take some time for her to understand as she works with the appropriate mental health professionals. But of course, does she understand how she was in that situation and what brought her to that place? She's beginning to. But this is a process.
Where do you want her placed and for how long?
We're going to talk about the exact location of placement on the 13th at the next hearing. And for how long, that's up to the professionals. But the goal will be to have her, again, this is the least restrictive sanction. And we do know that she has responded well to the treatment at the agencies that she's been to thus far. I expect that will continue. And our goal is to get her home and back embraced with her family as soon as possible.
Right,
Any
so,
idea how long that would be? 5 years, 10
We'll
years?
discuss that on Friday the 13th.
right. So there is a chance that she would not be confined to an institution for a lengthy period, perhaps even as far as the rest of her life. You'd want her out back with her family.
We do. As long as she's getting the care, it'll be at the right place. And that the judge will have the opportunity to review how she's doing, so kind of her progress throughout, and can change, modify the settings and the type of treatment that she's getting until eventually it's determined that the rightful place for her is at home with her family.
Do you believe in her mind and from what you've heard from her that she believes God compelled her to do this?
Well, you're getting into a complicated question because what she believed was affected by a mental health disease. So you really have to talk about, what she was thinking, what was real, what wasn't. You heard the court today talk about delusional thinking. So it's a really complicated question. All I can say is what was going on through her mind was affected by a severe mental disease on that day. Ruth Miller today, as treated, and the Ruth Miller that is going to continue to grow with care, certainly would not be thinking the same way that she did back on that day.
Has she spoke at all to you about any emotion that she has at the death of her 4-year-old child?
So that I can't get into anything that I would have learned from her through the attorney-client privilege at this point, but I will say to you, I think it would be unimaginable for anyone in this position not to be, saddened's not the right word, mortified is probably a better word for it, to find out what they were involved with, whether or not they were NGR or not, anyone involved in that. But in this case, even though the court determined that she was not able to appreciate the wrongfulness of her conduct, she was still there, and she still played that part in it. And of course she's going to be affected by that.
There was that word again, unimaginable, and that really is probably a fairly good description of this entire story. A woman who claims she gave her son to God by throwing him in a lake to drown is unimaginable. What that little boy must have been going through is unimaginable. And now we wait to see Ruth Miller's fate. On some level, clearly, mental health treatment will continue, but the state, the prosecution, would like to see that be on a lockdown status where she is not allowed to leave a facility. As you heard from the defense, if there becomes a day where the doctors and the court deem that she is stable and continues treatment, he would like to see her sent home to her family, but that will be up to a judge. This is a segment a show that we do every week here on our digital properties. It's called From Someone Who Knows, because you get to hear from the people who know every in and out of a particular story. When you see a story on Channel 19, maybe we can only bring you 2 or 3 minutes of that story, but here you get much more. And that QR code will take you to our past episodes. There is the full gamut of episodes that we've had for From Someone Who Knows. And with that, I'm Dan DeRose with 19 News, and you have watched From Someone Who Knows.